Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. So Thursday night, everyone was buzzing about a surprise guest at the Democratic National Convention. Would it be Beyonce, Taylor Swift, Mitt Romney? Mitt Romney is one of Beyonce's dancers. But the surprise guest turned out to be Kamala Harris, because this wasn't supposed to be her nomination. Just cast your minds back to what was probably the most stunning debate in presidential history, and you'll understand why. So here we are at the tail end of one of the strangest summers in recent memory, and Harris is the nominee. The big question before Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, can they think of a way to stop her momentum apart from insulting her? Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Eugene Daniels is Politico's White House correspondent and co-author of Playbook. Mark Leibovich is my colleague and a staff writer at The Atlantic. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief at USA Today. And Ali Vitale is a Capitol Hill correspondent at NBC News and the author of Electable, Why America Hasn't Put a Woman in the White House Yet. So, yet.
My crystal ball was working.
Yeah, no. You were going to be right sooner or later, right? It's going to be. Well, thank you all for joining me. Eugene, let's start with you. I just have a sort of a big general question for everybody. It's like, I want to get you're all just off the plane back from the convention. Your dominant impression of Kamala Harris right now, and your dominant understanding of momentum and what it means for the campaign. How does she translate some obvious momentum out of the last few weeks and this last week, especially into the swing states for the 75 days or so before the general?
Yeah, I think objectively she was effective in her speech, right? I think she had to introduce herself to a lot of people who didn't know her, and as someone who's covered her this entire time as vice president when she was running, she doesn't talk about her family and kind of emotions a lot. She talked about that quite a bit, but she also did this thing that's really interesting, and I was on the floor for like 5 hours waiting for Beyonce, but also Kamala Harris, and she kind of reclaimed patriotism. They handed out a lot of flags, which is not something you're always thinking about at a Democratic National Convention. Yeah. The chants of USA, she talked about this election as one of her and Tim Walz, and their stories can only happen here in America. Barack Obama in 2008, talking about her parents who were immigrants that came here and they would only meet in this country in that way. And then talking to the American people and saying, I'm just like you, the kinds of things that you deal with. You know, I came from the middle class. She's definitely not middle class anymore, but I came from the middle class, you know, those kinds of things. It is trying to draw out the fact that, in her estimation, Donald Trump is not someone that people who are in the middle class should see themselves in. She talked about herself as a prosecutor and that he's the only person who has ever been his that he's ever worked for is himself, right? She works for the people. Those are the things that's really interesting. On the momentum, I've never seen anything like this in the Democratic Party, probably since 2008. And the excitement that was in there, the excitement that was on that stage is palpable, and you could like really feel it. Mm-hmm. But if those people on the stage don't get out for her, it's one thing to get on stage and you can sell a book, and you know you're up there, and all of a sudden people are going to.
I mean, she had them at hello. That's not the point.
Had them at hello, but now they have to keep doing that, and they need to get out on the road. And I think they need to do more than just go to big cities. They have talked about this rural strategy that they have. They have to actually do something with that.
Yeah, Susan, the momentum.
The most sure-footed 33 days in modern American political history that we've seen. She's gone from being...
That's a big statement.
No, she in 33 days, she went from being number 2 on a ticket that was trailing, and now she has made virtually not a single mistake and has claimed the nomination and momentum and got the Democrats back to an even-up race. Now, she's got some challenges ahead the next 74 days. She's going to have to do an interview, maybe more.
We're going to get to that.
Yeah. She's going to have to do a debate. I think she goes into that with some real advantages against Donald Trump.
Oh, talk about that.
Well, you know, I moderated the last debate she did.
Yes.
Which was the vice presidential debate in 2020.
Such a good flex.
I mean, we all did, but we don't talk about it.
And, you know, that was a campaign where she didn't show nearly as much sure-footedness as she has now, but she is a good debater. She shows her prosecutorial chops.
Yeah. Let's go to the blue team. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything you just said, Susan, about Kamala Harris. I think she is propelled by forces well beyond herself. One, the sort of pent-up release around the unhappiness around the Biden at the top of the ticket. I mean, that was such a tense and unhappy and really kind of moribund feeling at the beginning of the summer, kind of came to a head around the debate. I mean, this is all why there will be documentaries and books about this summer entirely. But I think she clearly benefited from that. She clearly benefited from the choice of Tim Walz to this point. But also just the release. I mean, I think this week has been a culmination of that. The question is, it can't be a culmination. It has to continue. I mean, and the question is, will this propel her forward? It looks like everyone's on board. I think the week went really well. I think there was some awkwardness around Biden's sort of, keynote, goodbye, good riddance, whatever you want to say it was. But that kind of had to be dealt with, and they kind of dispatched with it on Monday night. And, I think this will all be defined by what happens in November.
Right.
It propels you forward until it doesn't, right? Like, we're going to find out what the ceilings are. We already know where Trump's ceiling is, where his floor is. It's somewhere in the low 30s. That's all the conventional knowledge. For her, she's untested, even in the way of, yes, she's been on the ballot as a vice president, but she dropped out in 2020 before anyone could vote for her or not vote for her. And I remember thinking when I was covering that campaign that that's a blessing to her, and also hard for journalists who are trying to make sense of what a Kamala coalition actually looks like. I do think she has shaken off any of the ghosts of the 2020 debate cycle, all of that. But
quick question for you, and whoever wants to jump in. Remind us why it didn't go well for her in that.
How much time do I have?
Give me the 30-second version.
I do think that the short answer there was she was directionless in a field where people had clearly established lanes, clearly established brands, and she herself seemed at times, and I'm sure you guys would agree, confused as to what her policy positions were. She ended up in these circular spirals of, okay, but is your healthcare policy good with private insurance, or is it not good with private insurance? What do you mean when you say you want a public option? I remember we would just go round in circles. The campaign apparatus didn't have a clear strategy within it. I reported that partially in my book, or a hierarchy, which of course was part of the problem. But I think the one thing that really struck me about Harris last night was that that's gone.
But
she
pays a price for that campaign because she took some positions like banning fracking. Oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Yes, at the end I was for Medicare for all. These are positions she doesn't want to hold now. So she can either be targeted as somebody who is super liberal with these positions, or someone who flip-flopped on
Yeah, but she hasn't to this point, and that I think underscores one that she might be a little bit bulletproof on this, but also this all is predicated on the other side having some kind of disciplined messaging machine, and the guy at the top of the ticket is leading it, and it has not been focused.
Let me pivot to something interesting about the Democratic National Convention versus the Republican. I mean, so the RNC, you had the one living ex-Republican president, George W. Bush, not there. 2012. Standard bearer, Mitt Romney, not there. No living Republican former vice president there, including Donald Trump's former vice president, who won't endorse him. DNC felt like a kind of a gangs all here moment. Watch Michelle Obama sort of set the tone for what I'm talking about. Let's watch this for a second.
She understands that most of us will never be afforded the grace of failing forward. We will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth. If we bankrupt a business or choke in a crisis, we don't get a second, third, or fourth chance. If things don't go our way, we don't have the luxury of whining or cheating others to get further ahead. No. We don't get to change the rules so we always win. If we see a mountain in front of us, we don't expect there to be an escalator waiting to take us to the top. No.
By the way, just noting for the record that the gap between her Michelle Obama's political talent and her lack of desire to be in politics is the greatest gap in American
politics.
In American life. I mean, that is a talented.
That was the greatest speech of the convention.
That was well. So this goes to my question. You think Tim Walz? We'll vote later. Well, this is my question. They brought the whole team and very effective advocacy for Kamala Harris. Trump was alone at his convention. It was the Trump family production. Does that matter that there was one pretty effective, hard-hitting speech after another against Trump? What does it pretend?
I think it tells you, for voters who are like trying to figure out Vice President Harris, everybody told a different aspect of her, right? And that is something when you're trying to reintroduce yourself, you need these validators over and over and over again. Michelle Obama continues to be the most admired woman on Earth, right? There's no one better to have on Earth, on the planet, and maybe other planets too. You know, I don't know. I haven't talked to Mars.
Taylor Swift?
Maybe
More?
no. Don't
do I
start that fight.
come for Taylor.
All the Swifties here. But you also have Barack Obama, who goes for a long time and has talked about and been affected by Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, all of these folks who were mainstays in our culture, but also talking about different things. You had Hillary Clinton talking about the glass ceiling again, but Vice President Harris not doing that. Donald Trump not having anyone but kind of like his vanquished enemies and his family members doing the validating for him, I think swing voters are paying attention to that.
Go ahead.
Validators are essential for all the obvious reasons, but for women candidates specifically, and there are so many studies that point to this. And so having those people on stage, yes, that's the point of a convention, but it's also something that so many of the people who work in the Harris orbit and in the larger Democratic Party have studied this. They have lived this in 16, in 20. They are living the result of Hillary Clinton's loss. And it's striking to me, everyone I think was looking for Kamala Harris to have a moment where, will she wear the white suit and go to the suffragettes? Will she lean in on her firstness, on her historic nature? And she didn't on purpose, because everyone who looks at her knows that she is historic. They know that she occupies spaces that no Black woman has ever occupied before, and that she's breaking glass ceilings. But the way that they spoke to it, Michelle Obama did this, Kamala Harris did this, Maya Harris did this. They told their stories through the women who were powerful and impactful in their lives. Matriarchy was such a thread that ran through this. When Michelle Obama talks about the cliff that women and people of color can fall off of because of their non-white, non-maleness, there are people who feel extremely seen and heard in that. You don't have to say, I'm first. You just have to say that. People know what you're talking about, and it's just as impactful and just as important.
California Senator LaFonza Butler, I did an interview with her while I was there, and I asked her about this, and I said, is she going to do that? Should she? And she said, Black women do not need to remind y'all we are Black women. Y'all will remind us that we're Black women. I thought that was such an interesting point, because they don't have to go out there and say that, because the world will remind Black women over and over and over again that they are Black, that they are a woman, that they are a Black woman. And that is something that Vice President Harris clearly knows. The choice of a dark color, Simone Sanders, her former aide and now at MSNBC, talked about it as a point to saying to people, no, we need to get to work. I'll wear the white later.
Right. No, that's interesting.